The National Football League Draft, also called the Player Selection Meeting, is an annual event in which the National Football League teams select eligible college football players. It serves as the league's most common source of player recruitment. The basic design of the draft is that each team is given a position in the drafting order in reverse order relative to its record in the previous year, which means that the last-placed team is positioned first. From this position, the team can either select a player or trade their position to another team for other draft positions, a player or players, or any combination thereof. After each team has utilized its position in the drafting order, whether by trading it or selecting a player, a round would be complete. Certain aspects of the draft, including team positioning and the number of rounds in the draft, have seen revisions since its first creation in 1936. But the fundamental methodology has remained the same. Currently the draft consists of 7 rounds. The original rationale in creating the draft was to increase the competitive parity between the teams, as the worst team would, ideally, have chosen the best player available. In the early years of the draft, players were chosen based on hearsay, print media, or other rudimentary evidence of a player's ability. In the 1940s, some franchises began employing full-time scouts. The ensuing success of their corresponding teams eventually forced the other franchises to also hire scouts. Colloquially, the name of the draft each year takes on the form of the NFL season in which players picked could begin playing. For example, the 2010 NFL Draft was for the 2010 NFL season. However, the NFL-defined name of the process has changed since its inception. The location of the draft has continually changed over the years to accommodate more fans, as the event has gained popularity. The draft's popularity now garners primetime television coverage. In recent years, the NFL Draft has occurred in late April or early May. History, precursor and rationale. In late 1934, Art Rooney, owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, gave the right of usage of 2 players to the New York Giants because Rooney's team had no chance to participate in the postseason. After the owner of the Boston Redskins, George Preston Marshall, protested the transaction, the president of the NFL, Joe F. Carr, disallowed the Giants the ability to employ the players. At a league meeting in December 1934, the NFL introduced a waiver rule to prevent such transactions. Any player released by a team during the season would be able to be claimed by other teams. The selection order to claim the player would be in inverse order to the team's standings at the time. Throughout this time, Bert Bell, co-owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, felt his team's lack of competitiveness on the field made it difficult for the Eagles to sell tickets and to be profitable. Compounding the Eagler problems were players signed with teams that offered the most money, or if the money being equal, players chose to sign with the most prestigious teams at the time, who had established a winning tradition. As a result, the NFL was dominated by the Chicago Bears, Green Bay Packers, Giants, and Redskins. Bell's inability to sign a desired prospect, Stan Kostka, in 1935, eventually led Bell to believe the only way for the NFL to have enduring success was for all teams to have an equal opportunity to sign eligible players. At a league meeting on May 18, 1935, Bell proposed a draft be instituted to enhance the competitive parity on the field in order to ensure the financial viability of all franchises. His proposal was adopted unanimously that day, although the first draft would not occur until the next off-season. The rules for the selection of the players in the first draft were, first, that a list of college stars would be assembled by each franchise and submitted into a pool. From this pool, each franchise would select, in inverse order to their team's record in the previous year, a player. With this selection, the franchise had the unilateral right to negotiate a contract with that player, or the ability to trade that player to another team for a player, or players, If, for any reason, the franchise was unsuccessful in negotiating a contract with the player and was unable to trade the player, the president of the NFL could attempt to arbitrate a settlement between the player and the franchise. If the president was unable to settle the dispute, then the player would be placed in the reserve list of the franchise and would be unavailable to play for any team in the NFL that year. In the 1935 NFL season, the Eagles finished in last place at 2-9, thus securing themselves the first pick in the draft. The first NFL draft began at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia on February 8, 1936. 90 names were written on a blackboard in the meeting room from which the teams would choose. As no team had a scouting department, the list was created from either print media sources, visits to local colleges by team executives, or by recommendations to team executives. The draft would last for 9 rounds, and it had no media coverage. The first player ever selected in the draft was J. Burr Wanger. Bell, prior to the draft, was not successfully able to negotiate a contract with Burr Wanger, so Bell traded him to the Bears. George Halas, owner of the Bears, was also unsuccessful in signing Burr Wanger. Burr Wanger's decision to not play in the NFL was not unusual, as only 24 of the 81 players selected chose to play in the NFL that year. The draft was recessed on the first day and it was continued and finished on the next day. This draft saw the emergence of Wellington Mara as a savant, as he had been subscribing to magazines and local and out-of-town papers to build up dossiers of college players across the country, which resulted in the Giants drafting of Tuffy Lemons. As a result of the institution of the draft, Tim Mara, owner of the Giants, reduced Kent Strong's salary offer to $3,200 from $6,000 a year for 1936 because Mara felt the draft would alter the salary structure of the NFL. Generally, the franchise exclusivity in negotiating with draft picks produced the immediate effect of, depending on sources, stopping the escalating salaries of new players, or reducing their salaries. Consequently, contemporary critics charged it was anti-labor. Early drafts. Art Rooney, owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates, chose Byron "Whizzer" White in the first round of the 1938 draft despite White's known public declaration that he would not play professional football and would instead begin work on his Rhodes Scholarship. White did, however, agree to play for the 1938 season after Rooney publicly gave him a guaranteed contract of $15,000, double what any other player had ever made in the NFL. The size of the dollar amount brought condemnation from other owners because it altered the pay expectations of college draftees. For the 1939 draft, Wellington, for the first time, was put in charge of drafting players for the Giants. He submitted the list of players into the pool that the Giants, or other franchises, could choose players from. However, in the first round he selected a player, Walt Nielsen, not on the list of players that the Giants or any other franchise had submitted. With a grin, Wellington stated, "I didn't think I said I put every name on that list." An African American had not played in the NFL since prior to the draft's institution. In 1939, Kenny Washington was, to no small extent, viewed as one of the greatest college football players of all time. After information was made available to at least one owner of a franchise, Washington was not drafted by any team for the 1940 NFL draft. The draft would be eventually codified into the NFL Constitution, although no information is available on when that originally occurred. Bullet Bill Dudley was the first overall pick in the 1942 draft, and he would eventually become the first player picked first overall in the draft to enter the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Scouting era begins. Eddie Kotal became the first scout in 1946 when he was hired by Dan Reeves of the Los Angeles Rams. The NFL's competition with the AAFC in 1947 resulted in a temporary institution of a bonus pick. Competitive parity did not, however, quickly arrive in the NFL, as perennial losers, such as the Eagles and Chicago Cardinals, standings did not improve until 1947. In the 13th round, George Taliaferro became the first African-American selected when he was chosen in the 1949 NFL Draft. He, however, chose to sign with an AAFC team. Wally Triplett was chosen in the 19th, and he would be the first African-American to be selected in the draft and make an NFL team. After the draft and prior to the start of the season, Paul "Tank" Younger was signed by the Los Angeles Rams as a free agent and became the first NFL player from an historically black college. Eddie Robinson, Younger's coach at Grambling, promptly and unequivocally impressed upon him that the future of the recruitment and drafting of his colleagues at other black colleges lay in the balance based on his success with the Rams. Technology. The 1960 NFL Draft marked a turning point in the draft's history, due to the pending arrival of the American Football League, as it became a high-stakes, competitive affair. In 1976, former NFL wide receiver Paul Salata first coined the moniker Mr. Irrelevant to refer to the last overall player selected in the draft. ESPN and the digital age. In 1980, Chet Simmons, president of the year-old ESPN, asked Pete Rozelle if the fledgling network could broadcast coverage of the draft live on ESPN. Although Rozelle did not believe it would be entertaining television, he agreed. In 1988, the NFL moved the draft from weekdays to the weekend, and ESPN's ratings of the coverage improved dramatically. ESPN received competition in 2006 when the NFL Network, which had launched in October 2003, began to produce its own draft coverage. In 2010, the NFL moved to a three-day draft, with the first day encompassing the first round beginning at 8 p.m. EDT, the second day encompassing the second and third rounds beginning at 7 p.m. EDT, and third day concluding the process with the final four rounds beginning at 11 a.m. EDT Saturday.